Welcome, Quicksters. We're so happy you're here. I'm Susie, along with my co-host, James. How are you, James?
Hey, Susie, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I was thinking about something to talk about today, and it really comes from the fact that I have a unique perspective because I often work with both sides of the equation, right?
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah. So I often, and I am right now working with executives and their team. And
Okay.
sometimes I work with the team as a collective, and sometimes I work one-on-one. But right now I'm working with this executive and a direct report. And the direct report, I'm getting feedback. They both know what I'm working on
Okay. No secrets.
for both, but I don't share the confidential,
Of course.
kind of insecurities and behind closed doors. But what's really interesting is this leader has some issues with this one of her direct reports, and she's not able to see it the same way the boss does.
Oh, I see.
So the boss says she's not good at these aspects of their role. She's always traveling and meeting people, which is not a part of something she should do. But then when I talk to the direct report, when I talk to her, she's like, I am doing so well managing to my boss.
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing
yeah.
exactly what they need, even though she's been told directly these things. So it's super interesting because I think that so often we believe that people understand what we expect of them, and they don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just don't have a lot of self-awareness to know where they fall in terms of perspectives of their how they're doing.
Yeah. I think what you're really highlighting is a challenge that some of us have when we're managing people who are not as good as they think they are. Right. Many of us work with people who are actually better than they think they are. Those are our dream individuals that you really have to help them fulfill their full potential. But also at the same time, we work with people whose egos have gotten out unchecked. Maybe they haven't had good leaders to give them good feedback. And ultimately, they are not nearly as good as they think they are. We're going through promotions and reviews right now. And I've had more than one occasion where an individual has self-reflected or self-ranked themselves as the highest possible ranking, of which we have it is 1% of the population is that level, and we're going to give them the lowest possible ranking again. 1%.
Crazy.
And so there is a small part of the population that I think many of us deal with, which is just those who are not as nearly as good as they think they are.
Yeah. And so how are we going to look at this? Are we going to look at it from the person that doesn't understand, or are we going to look at it from the boss and what they do to help?
I think a lot of our listeners are the executive leaders who are struggling with those individuals. And I think if we can give them a guidance on how to create awareness of those individuals, how to teach them to be more objective. I think those who are thinking that they are better than they are, they're going to be hard to reach. They have already tuned out this episode.
Yes.
And so that's a different tagline, a different hook that we're going to have to get in there. But I think for today, let's focus on the challenges that leaders have when they have those individuals on their team.
Okay, I think that's really good. I think this is something that people face more often than they probably talk about.
In varying degrees too. There's some who are insanely overinflated, and sometimes those are good people, right? That's really what you want in a salesperson. No offense to our salespeople, but sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes it's inhibiting growth. I think we all run into it.
Yeah. All right. So tell us what's the first tip you give?
One thing I want to touch on before we go, and I think you can really provide some insight into this, is coachability. And I think first and foremost, before you run down maybe some of the pieces of advice I can give, is let's we have to be at that fork in the road, which is this person coachable? And I know that you and I both agree that despite our best intentions and the world we'd like to live in, there is a population of people who are just not coachable. Do you agree with that?
I completely do. And we want to believe it's not true, that we can make a difference. And you have to understand how coachable somebody is.
Yeah.
And if they're not coachable, I believe you have to be even more direct about what your feedback is or what you need them to do.
Right.
Because if you're not, they just won't get it. You almost need to tell them you are limiting yourself because you are not open to seeing your growth opportunities in a growth mindset. And until they get that, they have to want to get better. They have to want that growth.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. So we've decided now that in this particular scenario, the individual in question is coachable. That we do think that they have some room to grow. And I think that the first piece of advice I'll give perhaps is the way that you determine their coachability. To be honest with you, and that is first, you need to have some very constructive coaching sessions. You need to sit down with them and be very specific as to what's happening. Because I think that many of us coach on the fly, maybe softly coach, maybe in real time give guidance. But when you're dealing with somebody who is better than they think they are, you need to schedule some time to sit down and have a very specific conversation about how you want to coach them and how you want them to grow going forward. This is the opportunity for you to talk about where they are limiting themselves, talk about the areas very specifically about where they can grow, whether it's listening, communicating, execution, coaching their own teams. This has to be a very tight, constructive coaching session to set up the entire discussion.
Yes. I want to make 2 points on that. One is, so often it's like when we give people advice and they don't take it, I will just stop giving advice because when somebody doesn't take it. So I think that when you try to coach somebody and you realize they're not coachable, our tendency is to ignore them and let them be, because you're just like so frustrated. You're just going to let this problem just kind of like arm's length
solve itself. Yeah.
And so be aware of that if that's happening. And you need to address that. And I think the other piece of advice on that is to be really clear and concise and really make sure you set the meeting up, but also clearly help them understand if they don't change this is what's going to happen.
The outcome. Yes.
And I've heard through research is you literally have to say, I'm going to have to make a tough decision, and that not stop there. This is the ramification. I'm going to have to write you up. I'm going to have to, yes, this is
not
what's
just a
going to
tough
happen.
decision. It is a tough decision to let you go, a tough decision to take away your corporate jet access, whatever that ends up being, the latter being much worse. But that's how specific you have to be sometimes to get folks' attention.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right. What's number 2?
So the second one is, I think you couldn't have teed it up any better, is a very specific development plan, right? And I think the theme here on these first 2 items, which is that very, very targeted conversation, and the second one, which is very specific coaching plan and career plan, is the amount of rigor and structure that these 2 things need. Because oftentimes with a senior person, these things, your coaching sessions, your advice, your feedback aren't heard because they're not seen with the level of intensity that perhaps you are providing. Many times you have to think back to when you were coaching or leading an intern or an entry-level person, and that you literally had to sit down and go, okay, look, here is what I need you to do. Here is number 1. Do you understand what number 1 is? Now feed that back to me. Okay, by 3:00, I want you to do number 1. And that type of structure gives those entry-level folks the boundaries and the construct in which they can be successful. Sometimes you have to go back on to those and lean in on that. I think it's interesting too, because I've had conversations with leaders about people where they need to do this, and leaders forget how specific sometimes it's required. I think I've seen a couple executives who really struggled with this very simple task, which was write it down and be specific, because they hadn't done it for so long. Well, what do you mean specific? I mean, explain it like I'm 5, right? You really have to go to that level. And so while you're frustrated that you're dealing with a senior vice president, you really have to go back and you have to be very specific, put structure around it, and draw the lines between the dots so everyone can see it.
And I would say, then practice it with somebody and say, I need to be really clear. Does this sound really clear? And I'll go back to some of the research that I've mentioned before is we believe we're understood. We
Yes.
believe
Yes.
that our message is super clear, but the
Mm-hmm,
research
mm-hmm.
shows that we believe it's at a 80% and it's really at a
It's actually
20%.
20%. Yeah,
It's
that's crazy.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think it's great for you to address that kind of that misgiving or misunderstanding of our own communication style, but also leverage that in this discussion. You know, hey Jerry, I
Yeah.
said this. Did you hear? Now tell me back what I said.
Yes.
You know, hey
Yeah.
Rachel, this is what I said. Did you hear that? Give you
Yeah.
how we're going to do this. And I think specificity, crispness, and that honesty is just going to go a long way to addressing the issue.
I totally agree. I think to go to your point about being very specific, tell them I want to make sure I'm really clear. So I not only wrote this down, I'm going to follow up with an email to
Right.
send this to you. And then guess what that does? It gives you permission to send that follow-up email, which is documentation.
Absolutely.
Ding, 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 ding,
Fantastic.
ding.
Right. All those things make everything easier. We've
Yeah.
said on this show a million times that, I'm much more willing to hold somebody accountable and take just make difficult decisions and take difficult actions when I've been very clear as to my expectations.
Yes.
I'm loath to do that when I'm like, yeah, they're sort of not doing what I asked, but it's really on me too. Look, if I've been clear, if I've spoken that, I've written it down, I've gotten feedback from them that they heard me, I have absolutely no problem holding their feet to the fire or making tough decisions when I've been that crisp.
Yes, for sure. And it gives you something you can look back on too and go, oh,
To
that's right. I was really
correctly.
clear. Yes. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly.
For
We all have a lot of things going on.
Exactly.
And I'm going to jump to the third one, which I think is also interesting because it deals with the psychology of executive teams. You need to engage their peer set in this discussion because so often we'll see a bad actor on a team being either ignored or their issues not being addressed because their peers are tired. Their peers feel like it's not their responsibility. I'm not here to grow him. If he doesn't know how to be responsive, that is really not my problem. And oftentimes, feedback from peers is going to be more useful than it is perhaps from your boss or from a leader. And so engaging the peer network, engaging, those collaborative conversations, bringing in mentoring, bringing in that communication, that insight, that feedback from different angles goes a long way to reinforcing what you have asked for and what you've done.
Yeah, I love that one. And my suggestion around that would be instead of asking their peers to give feedback, have that person go to their peers and ask them for feedback because the peers aren't going to give it to them on their own. And like you said, they're tired.
Right.
They're like, they're tired of this shenanigans. They know what's going on. But if that person asks them for it, that will empower them to say it. And they will at that level.
Yeah, you totally will. And I think you just got to create the ecosystem for that to work, whether it's peers, could be people from outside the organization who have witnessed that. And then this is when coaches and folks like you are so valuable that they can come in, pull the content together and say, look, I'm outside. I'm an objective here. And yes, you're not listening. And so that kind of reflective gathering of perspective, I think, goes a long way to bringing that issue to the fore.
That is such a key point because this is such at that level and you have to do this work, having somebody from the outside to have your back and help and make sure that person has the clarity and you've been really clear is such a great resource that people need to tap.
Yeah. And I think people don't like to do that very often.
What are the three? Sorry, I was wrapping us up.
No, I was wrapping up too. I think it's just a reality of these are hard things to do. And so it takes a focused effort. So 3 things. 1, sit down, set the foundation with a very constructive, specific conversation. 2, have a good career path and plan conversation to show the expectations and then outcomes if those expectations aren't met. And 3, engage outside voices, whether it's peers, mentors, coaches, help reinforce the messaging that you're providing with another voice from the outside.
Oh, this is great. I'm going to use these tips with my clients. Thank you, James.
They're good
Another
stuff.
Good one.
Yep. Thanks so much. This is a good topic.